We see a lot of stories about terrible customers at restaurants, but what about when the tables turn and you meet a rude or incompetent waiter who seems to have it out for you for absolutely no reason? This video is full of stories of the worst servers of all time, including one who chose to mock a diner for eating vegetarian, only to have her words thrown right back in her face. My wife and I went out to dinner with some friends of ours to a new restaurant we had heard great things about. We sat down, and it turned out the waitress was an old friend of my wife's from high school. They hadn't seen each other since graduation, which was about 15 years at this point. So, the two of them were catching up and asking the usual questions like, "Do you have any kids?" My wife and I had made a concerted effort not to have kids. We didn't want any. So, when my wife responded with a simple no to her question, her friend looked at me with a very confused look on her face and said, "What? Are you shooting blanks or something?" I couldn't believe the audacity, even if they already knew each other. We ended up leaving without ordering anything. I guess when you're serving people you know, it might be easy to forget to keep your behavior in customer service mode, but seriously, even among friends, that question is wildly inappropriate. It wasn't anything the waiter said, but his actions were loud and clear. My boyfriend, my friend, and I went to a bar and grill that was pretty nice. The waiter came to take our order. He started with my boyfriend and was very friendly with him. When it came around to me, he took my order in a rush. When our food came out, I got mine last. Then the waiter came around to check on us and specifically asked my boyfriend if the steak was cooked right and if he liked it. He didn't ask anyone else, just him. When the time came to box up the leftovers, the waiter tossed my box onto my food and helped to box my boyfriend's food. I even sat there to see if he would do the same for me. Not that I expected him to, and he walked away after helping my boyfriend. Everybody just looked at each other, and we started laughing. It's always so uncomfortable to be in a position where you seem to have irked the waiter for some reason and can't figure out why. Of course, when you realize they're probably just hitting on the person you're with, all of a sudden, it makes so much sense. I was the nightlife coordinator for Caesars Entertainment. As a result, most of the managers and higher-ups knew me. However, unless I was at one of the nightclubs, the employees usually didn't know who I was. I went to eat at one of the new restaurants with a bachelorette party and decided to wait for them by the bar. I ordered a drink. About 5 minutes later, a bartender walked over to me and said I needed to move because I was sitting there with one drink and she could be getting other customers. This was a sit-down bar and she had singled me out. I told her, "I'm waiting for some friends." She replied, "I don't care. You're sitting here alone with one drink. I have more important groups I could be waiting on. Move." I told her, "Tell you what, get your managers to make me move and I'll gladly step away." At that point, she grabbed 2 security guards and the manager, all of whom knew me very well. She said, "I told him to get up and move, and he told me he's not going to unless you tell him." The manager replied, "Probably because he could fire me. That's the nightlife coordinator for the 4 properties." She was stunned. I looked at her and told her, "You're fired." Ooh, instant karma hits again. There's a good lesson here. Give every customer a fair chance because you never know who you're serving until it's way too late. I was at an expensive, newer restaurant in town, celebrating both my mom's birthday and Mother's Day with the rest of my family on her side. I wasn't too hungry and nothing on the menu looked too appetizing, so I ordered a Caesar salad. When I finally received it, the last of all the plates to arrive, the lettuce was insanely limp and the entire salad was slightly warm. The now warm dressing was lacking in any flavor whatsoever. We explained this to our waiter. He told me, "We make our own in-house Caesar dressing here. It might not be the craft dressing your family is used to." Unfortunately for him, my mom was 8 hours fresh from a 20-hour flight, would get a B in her bonnet about poor service at the best of times, and held a master's degree in law from Harvard. That day, he learned the meaning of regret. Crimes against Caesar salad are seriously business to me, and how dare he insult craft when the restaurant can't even get a simple dressing right. Heck, I'd be angry too. My mother and father met while working as a waiter and waitress in New York City back in the 1940s. 40 years later, in the 80s, they were out to dinner with a bunch of friends. The waiter was rude and inept, and the food was cold. The evening was only saved by good friends and good conversation. My dad was in charge of the check. He collected money from everyone and figured on a 15% tip, pretty standard for the time, as he thought the waiter might have been having a bad night and the cold food was not his fault. My dad left the money with the check and they all left. The waiter chased my dad out to the parking lot. He held out the tip he was given and said, "Do you really think this is fair? Or do you not get out often and don't know how to tip?" My dad looked at the waiter and said, "Well, I was a waiter for many years, and yeah, I know how to tip." He continued saying, "I gave you the benefit of the doubt, figuring you were just having a bad night. But you're right, this amount is not right." My dad took a $10 bill from the waiter's hand and continued, "Now it's right." Then he got into his car and left. This isn't the first time I've heard a story about a waiter chasing someone out of the restaurant to talk about their tip. I truly can't believe the gall of this guy, especially since the tip was, pretty normal in the first place. My husband was looking for a place to take his parents for their 50th birthdays. We had been to this one place before and loved it. Several other relatives were coming too, so we made a reservation for 12 people. The trouble started early on when we were seated at a table that was actually several short tables thrown together. The space was too cramped for our numbers. The tables were pushed so close to the wall, no more than a foot away or so, that the larger men in the family were all forced to sit on the other side of the table, and even the smaller people felt cramped. If the place only had this tightly packed front room in which to seat us, the poor seating would have been understandable. However, the restaurant also had a back room large enough to accommodate us, as well as an outdoor area suitable for a party our size. After about 15 minutes, the owner approached us and asked if we could all shift down a little so he could take one of the short tables and give it to someone else. Since we were already squished and had begun eating the bread, enjoying our drinks, and using the place settings, my boyfriend's father said politely, but firmly, no. The owner started arguing with us, even sitting himself down at the table in a chair, briefly vacated for a bathroom trip, to persuade us to move. He was getting pretty exercised. Eventually, he stalked away, muttering, "I just thought you could help me out." After that, my boyfriend's aunt left the table to talk to the owner, basically telling him that we were there for a special occasion and would appreciate it if he didn't speak so rudely to the birthday boy. He wasn't impressed and told her that if she didn't like it, we could all leave. We probably should have taken his advice. Our poor server tried mightily to salvage the evening, but his boss could be heard muttering things about us under his breath whenever he passed our table. On several occasions, he started in with members of our party about how we could sit more compactly. Towards the end of the disaster that was dinner, the owner came over one last time and tried to make peace. He soothingly admitted to my boyfriend's mother that we had all gotten off to a bad start and that he may have been at fault, but could not end it like that. Within 30 seconds of his apology, he followed up with something to the effect of, "But if you had just squeezed a bit tighter like I asked you to, we would all have been much happier." When it came time for dessert, my boyfriend asked the server if it would be possible for his parents' dessert to have candles put in them and if the rest of us could order dessert. The server was midway through taking our dessert orders when the owner pulled him away, shaking his head vigorously. The owner returned to tell us that there were simply too many people waiting for tables and he couldn't serve us dessert. Furious, we paid and walked out the door. Performing for the group of people waiting to be seated, the owner called us in a saccharine voice, "Have a wonderful evening." My boyfriend's father replied, "We'll never have one here again." The owner said, "Never come back to my restaurant," and slammed the door behind us. Oh my gosh, I would have been seeing red if I were there. It's one thing to make that suggestion to take away a table when it's already crowded, but it's another thing to harp in on and not let it go. Learn to take the L, my friend. I had just left the hospital and some friends picked me up to get a bite to eat. I had a 3rd-degree ACL tear in my knee, so I was limping around wearing this hip-to-ankle leg brace. You couldn't miss it. We grabbed a table, and I was on the outside next to the walkway with my bad leg tucked safely under the table and the good leg protecting me on the outer edge. Our waiter was this curt, unfriendly dude who was basically glaring the whole time. Eventually, he brought our food after slamming plates down roughly. He managed to hit my bad knee under the table while reaching to put food down on the far side. I hurt, so I yelled, "Ow!" pretty much in his ear since he was leaning in front of me. The dude didn't even react. My friend picked up on it and said, You just hit her." The waiter just walked away. So my friends decided that the server would get a $1 tip on each person's bill. I am not an advocate for tipping badly, but after having a fairly bad day end with being whacked on my already injured leg, I was okay with it, given the circumstances. My one awesome friend wrote a note on her receipt explaining why he was getting a lousy tip. Then we got up and slowly made our way outside. At that point, the waiter chased us down to defend his honor. He seemed outraged and said, "I didn't kick a girl with an ACL injury." I replied, yes you did. That would be me. I was exhausted and kind of shocked that it was even a question. My friend stepped in to relate the story of how I even yelled, and he was totally oblivious. He said, "Well then, I'm sorry." But he sure as heck didn't sound sorry. He turned angrily and went back into the restaurant. As he went in, another couple was leaving, and they overheard everything. Looking at my leg, the woman said, "He kicked you? I passed by him inside earlier, and he elbowed me and didn't say a word." Wow. Bad service is one thing, but pushing around customers you don't like is truly next level. I mean, all this guy has to do is cross paths with one person who isn't going to put up with getting shoved, and he'd end up learning a hard lesson. My evening began with the steak being undercooked. I enjoyed a good rare steak as much as the next person, but the inside wasn't cool and red. It was cold and purple. I sent it back twice, and when it came out the third time, it was still undercooked. I told the waitress to forget it. I was done. Everyone else was done eating, and I was filled up on bread at that point. She kept harassing me, telling me what a fine steak it was, and just to tell them how I wanted it cooked. When I told her I wasn't interested, she got rude. She told me she was cutting me off after only having 2 drinks. I finally told her to leave me alone as I was done talking to her. She returned 5 minutes later and said something like, "You're stuck with me. This is my table." I was just trying to ignore her. A few minutes later, she said, "Do you want me to get the chef out here? He's 6'3" tall." I said, "Why? Is he going to force a steak down my throat?" At that point, she tried to walk away, but I was beyond mad, so I stood up and said, "Yeah, get him out here. I'll shove this raw steak down his throat." She left and didn't come back. The chef didn't come out either. The manager came over, apologized profusely, and offered to get me a new steak and card for a free meal, but I had no intention of ever going back there to eat. Without a doubt, it was the worst experience I've ever had at a restaurant. I always treat waitstaff very nicely, and I tip well. I've done their job, and I know how much it sometimes sucks, so I can easily forgive a waitress that is in a bad mood or not very friendly. Her reaction, though, to a valid complaint was way over the line. A 6'3" tall chef or not, it's pretty brave to clap back at the waitress after she went off like that. I can't say I would have had the nerve to do the same thing, but hey, at least one person in this situation managed to keep their cool and help smooth things over. I was on holiday with my girlfriend in the Canary Islands. All the restaurants had a greeter outside to hustle for customers. Most were on the charming side of aggressive, but would offer free drinks so people let it slide. One guy asked us to come in for dinner as we were passing by. I said we were only going for a stroll, would think about it, and maybe come back later when we were hungry, which was true. He asked where we were from. I told him Ireland, and he said a few lines in Gaelic, and we had a chuckle. So, on the way back, he asked us again, and I told him we would keep looking. He grabbed me by my elbow and whispered something into my ear. He said, "Kiss my behind," in Gaelic. I was going to give him some choice words, but my girl was already dragging me away. We finally chose a restaurant with a sweet view of the water as the sun was setting, but you could also see the restaurant where this jerk was hawking. I was fuming, but didn't want to ruin my girl's night, so I kept quiet. Before the starter had come out, we heard a commotion. We looked down the street to see the same greeter jostling a dude in a Gaelic football jersey. This Irish dude pulled the best right hook punch I'd ever seen. The greeter went through a table. It was glorious. The funniest thing about it was that the greeters from the other restaurants started to clap and cheer, as did some of the people from the restaurant it happened outside of. Man, there's nothing worse than dealing with some hustler trying to catch you in a tourist trap. I wonder if he learned a lesson about messing with scrappy Irish dudes that day. I used to work at a country club, and I remember on my first day, my boss strictly advised that if you dropped a glass or a plate, anything that could or would shatter, to tell everyone to stay away from the area and stay seated until the mess was cleaned up. A week or so later, I was walking between a few tables and had a couple of glasses of water. I got one of them to the table and greeted an older couple. When I went for the other, it fell to the floor and shattered. Panicked, I continued to say, "I'm so sorry, please forgive me, wait just one moment and I'll get this cleaned up." The older man laughed and said, "It's all good, I'll be right back anyway. Need to hit the men's room." Right then, I saw my boss staring me down, and in a panic I yelled, "Sit down and stay calm." Luckily, he looked at me and burst out laughing. He said, "All right then, I'll wait, my bladder ain't that bad yet." My boss and all my coworkers thought it was the most hilarious thing they'd ever seen. But it was pretty rude and my friends still don't let me live it down. It's a nice to hear a story from the other side about how a little too much pressure can produce rude results, even if it's unintentional. I like to think I'd have a pretty good laugh if a server barked at me to sit down and stay calm. I was at Kansas City at this two-hip restaurant that consisted of little more than a bar, a stage for the jazz band, and a few tables. I was in from out of town visiting friends from college and was sitting at the bar with them for about an hour, waiting for a table to open up. When one finally did, the waitress came over to get us more drinks and talk about the menu, which was all prefix. All the items were based around meat, and I was a fairly strict vegetarian. I had reservations about going to the restaurant in the first place. I told the waitress very politely that I was a vegetarian and asked if they could make me anything. If not, I was perfectly happy to just nurse my martini for the rest of the night. About 15 minutes later, one of the chefs came out and sat at the table. The first words out of her mouth were, "So one of the waitresses came in to tell me that some dorky idiot wanted us to make him a vegetarian meal?" I replied, "And what did you say to her?" The chef said, "Well, first I told her to not call my best friend that name." Yeah, my best friend from college was one of the chefs, and the waitress unknowingly had talked trash about me to her. Once she saw me and the chef chatting, she went as white as a sheet and did her best to avoid my gaze for the rest of the night. Every once in a while, that rude waiter ends up getting what's coming to them, and it's never pretty. I hope she learned a lesson about making assumptions about her customers. That's the last of our tales about terrible servers for today, but check out the rest of our channel for more customer service nightmares and other jaw-dropping real-life stories. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like rating, subscribe for more, and we'll be back with a brand new video very soon.